Well, welcome one and all to this Brit Events Northwest one-on-one interview. My name is Steve Caldwell, General Manager of Brit Events Northwest. My guest today is the Brit Events Northwest US immigration expert and former UK barrister Tahmina Watson. You will find Tahmina's profile on the Brit Events North website page where you click the link to this video. We had hoped to have done an in-person group meeting on the topics we are discussing today, but the COVID-19 virus stymied that. So, welcome Tahmina, and I hope you're well and coping with the new normal of work-life balance.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm so happy to be here. It's definitely an interesting time in the world, in our local area, and also in our households. I'm now teacher, cleaner, slave to my kids, on top of all the other duties I've always had. So it's definitely an interesting time.
Yeah, a whole new meaning to multitasking, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so our focus today with Tahmina is on green card applicants, green card holders, and work visas. We will look at already announced changes by the Trump administration and the effects of the executive order 60-day pause during the COVID-19 virus emergency, and some additional changes being contemplated. So, Tahmina, I have quite a few questions to ask you. Let's begin. So first, what changes to the regulations for 2020 were announced prior to the virus emergency?
You know, it's been a very eventful year so far, and of course, none of us could have predicted what we're seeing now. Before COVID-19 was really going to take over our lives, in February 2020, the administration imposed a new rule called public charge. And what that refers to is that anybody coming to the US, primarily getting a green card, but also getting a work visa or even tourist visa, they will need to show that they are financially self-sufficient. The burden is very, very high, and it's a very complicated process, particularly for green card applicants. And that was imposed on February 24th. So any application that is being filed as we speak for green cards will be affected by that news. That was the big one that will really affect immigrants coming to the US and non-immigrants. While there are other smaller policies, they're sort of, we can talk about them as they come up into our questions.
Okay, so what about renewing green card holders? Will they see a difference in what to expect on this public charge compared to prior applications for renewal?
Very good question. This new rule, public charge, affects only people applying for new green cards. So if you already have a green card, you are not subject to that in the same way. So when you renew it in the way that you have always done it. Essentially, the government is looking at anybody coming into the US after this application, this new regulation was imposed, that you are not going to be resorting to public assistance.
Okay, got you. I'm glad I got mine renewed a couple of years ago. So, second question is, what is the 60-day pause and on whom does it have an impact?
Good question. So March and April, of course, is when the US started to put in restrictions on COVID-19 issues. And what that brought was essentially various iterations of the travel ban that we've seen through this administration's time in office. And initially, there was a travel ban restriction for people coming from Europe. If they had been in Europe for the last 14 days, they couldn't come into the US. And following from that, a new travel ban was imposed. UK was added to this list. Initially, UK was not. And this was in April when the government said, not only are we not letting people from these countries come in, we are adding other countries to it, but we're also adding applications for green cards to be put on pause. And what that meant was anybody applying for a green card through parents, or rather you are applying for a parent, you are applying for a sibling, or you are getting a green card for adult children, so these three categories in family-based immigration, but also people getting green cards in employment-based options. Now, what it meant was if you are in the pipeline to get a green card while you're outside the US, you will not be able to get that green card for 60 days. There are caveats for that, and the caveat was essentially if you already have a green card stamp in your passport and it is valid, you can come in still. But if the stamp has not been issued, meaning you have not had an interview, you will not be able to do that for 60 days. Now, what was said is that during that 60 days, the government will be reassessing the restrictions, and they could be imposing more restrictions in the near future. We just passed, we haven't quite passed 60 days, I don't think. We have, and it's coming. And so we'll see what happens with that. The new restriction that was put in recently was for students who are coming from China who have some military involvement. But the practice of it, Steve, is that the embassies were already closed, and they expect to be closed already, you know, for the near future. So we don't know in practice whether this would have changed anyway. But what is important to know is it is now in writing that the government can delay these particular green cards, and it's possible that these delays can be extended. And that's the key that us advocates, us lawyers are concerned about mostly.
So just going back to work visas, can you, I think you did mention this, but can you just refresh my memory about whether this 60-day pause impacts work visas?
If you already have a work visa, you actually may not still be able to come in if you've been in a Schengen country or the UK 14 days prior to coming to the US. So you may still have that restriction. But if you have a US citizen spouse or a green card holder spouse, you can actually still come into the US if you have a work visa.
Right. And what if your work visa is expiring? Is there any impact of this on that? Or will it be renewed without any difficulty?
The renewal questions will really depend on when the embassy is open. So if you are a visa holder without having a green card or a US citizen spouse, you potentially cannot come into the US anymore. But if your visa is expiring, the double whammy to that is you have to wait for the UK embassy to open. And we really don't know when that will be. In the United States, the offices of US Citizenship and Immigration Services had also closed down. However, this week, June 4th, local offices were slowly starting to open. The trouble is that because there'd been such a backlog of people that needed to be seen while this closure was going on, we don't know what the future looks like. Are they going to prioritize people's interviews that were cancelled? or are they going to have people come in afresh? And so that same issue really applies to embassies around the world, because as you can imagine, embassies are actually pretty blocked, packed with interviews every day. So if you think about the number of people that were cancelled, when new interviews come up, we don't know what that distribution is going to look like. And I personally have clients who are waiting in the UK for interviews. And as news comes about, Steve, I'd be happy to update you. But for the moment, the answer is we don't really know. They have to wait and see what the embassies do. Some embassies might be taking applications. It's whether you can actually get the interview anytime soon.
Okay, and that sort of mostly answers my next question, which was that green card and work visa applicants who are not in the USA at the moment, that pretty much covers them, doesn't it? That they're. Are there any exceptions to that on work visas? Because I know normally there are some exceptions on there. For instance, people who are who've got medical qualifications that would assist with the virus emergency.
That's a very good question. Yes, there are some caveats. So if you if you are in the medical profession, you will be exempted. And what I will make sure you have, Steve, is the actual travel ban order that the president signed, because it is clearly written in black and white who is allowed and who isn't. And that would be the thing to post everywhere so people can see whether they fall within those exemptions or not.
Right. And hopefully by the time this interview's posted on the website, we'll be able to add that as a document on that page.
Very good.
So one of the things with the whole virus emergency and leading up to what is a year of potential transition as we head for a federal election, are there any changes in the federal government's organisation or priorities that also, on top of what we've already said, might impact applications or renewals?
What's happening in the US at the moment is there was already a very prolonged processing time, meaning that any application you filed, whether it was a green card application or a citizenship application or anything of that sort, it was already taking a long time. And as COVID-19 hit us, the USCIS started to have, closures around the country, but the service centers were not closed. Meaning, if you think about USCIS or the Department of Homeland Security, it's a very large agency. And within this agency, there are departments, there's the Customs and Border Protection, there's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and there's USCIS. Now, USCIS is this big machine, and it has service centers, meaning large offices, which are essentially where applications go. And once they go to these big hubs, if you like, they get distributed to the local offices. Now, these big hubs, the service centers, remained open. So they were taking applications, they continue to take applications. The processing, unfortunately, is not necessarily quick. There are some surprising differences, and those differences are essentially that some of our work visa cases, oddly enough, have actually processed very quickly. We were rather surprised, but in general, processing is taking a longer time. So if you are on a work visa, you want to be able to renew that at the earliest opportunity, which is really 6 months in advance of the expiration date. One of the things that the government did was they stopped something called premium processing. Premium processing means that you give the government extra money $1,440, and they will adjudicate your case within 14 days. They had suspended that for the last 2 months. However, they have just started to reopen or premium processing, meaning they will take that. And so for anybody on a work visa, from June 22nd, you can start applying for premium processing again. And I would strongly recommend that anybody who's renewing a work visa does so at the earliest opportunity. So count back 6 months, get that filed, and if premium processing is available to you, file it doing that. Because the widely widely messaged news is that COVID-19 will, hit us hard again in the fall. And that's, just 3 months away from now. So if you have a visa that's going to be expiring in 3 months and you're waiting around, you may be affected by even more unknown problems that we can't even fathom because we're just, drowning in the current problem. Now, with the green cards, you can still apply for them. You can apply for them anytime. And so you should continue to apply for them. Those processing times are already at a 2-year mark. So our hope is by the time you're ready for an interview, those will be ready to process. The delay is happening really with fingerprinting. So a lot of cases will have fingerprinting requirements. So green cards will have them. For work visa, spouses and children, if they are your dependent, they now have fingerprinting requirements. And that was another rule that was imposed this year. Or was it late last year? I can't remember. Time is a blur. But regardless, fingerprinting is part of the process. And because USCIS local offices were closed for so long, that's where the delay could potentially happen for some of these cases, because the fingerprinting won't happen quick enough.
Gotcha. Thinking about green card renewals who may be delayed as part of this process. I recall from the last time I renewed that although I renewed in time, that I was told that the actual card itself would take up to 7 months to arrive. As part of this potential delay process, is the Department of Homeland Security issuing extension stamps on existing green cards?
What happens when you file for a green card application for renewal, you will get a letter saying we got your application and your status has been extended, depending on where you are in this green card situation. So say, for example, if you got a green card through marriage and it's going to expire in 2 months, or 2 years, sorry, you have to renew those green cards. And when you get that receipt, it extends your green card status for 18 months. But for you, like Steve, or anybody who's a permanent green card holder, you're actually a green card holder forever, unless the judge takes it away. The question is that you don't have physical proof that you are still a green card holder. So if you're going for a job interview and your application is pending, you want to take your existing green card that likely had expired, but also the receipt notice. Now, in your passport, you can often get a stamp from USCIS saying this person is still a green card holder. Or sometimes they could put a little sticky on your green card saying green card extended for some time. The trouble is we go back to the USCIS office as being closed, that they may not be able to see you in time. And so you have to take the receipt notice and perhaps even educate HR folks about evidence that is necessary. But USCIS simultaneously has also given some instructions on I-9 forms. I-9 forms are the forms that employers have to complete when they are verifying somebody is permitted to work in the US. So HR likely will see some relaxed rules on that. I haven't brushed up on all of those, unfortunately, to tell you what they are. But you will not be able to likely get a stamp in your passport in this period. But I will share one good news. There was somebody that I assisted recently, I would say sometime in March, early March, or late April, late February, and she applied for a renewal of a green card online, and her fingerprinting, I forget whether she did fingerprinting, I don't think she did. It was, they said, we will use your previous fingerprinting. So
Right.
USCIS has on some occasions made some exceptions for people. And so I don't know if that would apply to anybody listening now. You don't assume it will. But if it happens, you thank your lucky stars and,
Right.
move on.
Right. Okay. Yeah, it appears to me that it's a moving feast, and I'm certain that what my final question, or pretty much my final question, will address that issue. However, my next question is, are there additional future potential changes in regulations, organizations, or approach to immigration policy you would like to highlight?
Yes, that's a really good question. The trouble is, I don't have a crystal ball to tell you what those changes will be. But what I anticipate is, number one, the government has left the door open to make more changes, uh, extending the travel ban, or based on COVID-19, using that as a vehicle to bring more restrictions. So keep an eye on the news for that. And one way to get information is to sign up to our blog at Watson Immigration Law. So Watson Immigration Law is my law firm. There's a tab called blog. If you go to that, you can sign up, and we regularly write about issues that impact our clients. So there could be changes to potentially, how work visas are being administered. We don't know what they are, which work visas, but they could be. And it's well known that this administration has tried to make restrictions on H-1B visas. So watch this space. USCIS fees are very likely to go up soon. The government had already put in place rules. They had gone through the rulemaking process. And just very quickly to tell people how rulemaking works here, the government has to put forward a proposed rule saying this is what I want to do. And then the public gets an opportunity to respond, saying, well, this is too high, or this is good, or that is bad. And the government leaves that window open generally for 60 days, sometimes less. And this administration has often given less time. And those rules have gone through that process where they've gone through the comment period. And we're anticipating the final rule anytime. And that rule could come, it was thought that maybe by November. But what has happened in the last 3 weeks, I'd say, everything is moving very fast. USCIS, that agency from Department of Homeland Security that runs immigration, they have come out saying we don't have enough money for our agency. And USCIS is actually a fee-based agency, meaning that they take money from us, our clients, our community, for every form. So every form has a fee attached to it. And in theory, that fee is supposed to pay the salaries of the officers and the administrative costs. But because of all the various delays that this administration has imposed, added restrictions and so forth, that money hasn't been managed properly. So suddenly we are, for the first time ever, hearing that the agency is going to run out of money. So this is their prime opportunity to have that fee increase rule go into effect sooner rather than later. And so we think potentially June, July is when it could go up. The agency is asking the administration to give money. They want federal money. We don't know what will happen with that, but this is already teed up essentially to put into effect. And so watch this space. But what are these fee increases? If you're waiting to apply for citizenship, do it now, because that fee is going to triple essentially. At the moment, it's about $675, if my memory serves me right. It's gonna shoot up significantly. Every single USCIS fee is gonna go up significantly, and the way that they take fees will also change. So work visas, for example, those fees, the way they collect them will change. So if you are somebody who's thinking about applying for a green card, don't wait for it, because there are already changes, like I mentioned, public charge that's already gone into effect, but the fees will go up. If you're waiting to apply for citizenship, do it now. What are you waiting for? You know, these fees will make it preventative. That's what they're designed to do. And if you're waiting to apply for renew your work visa or any other type of visa that you have, do it sooner rather than later. The unforeseen problems are, number one, yes, the fees are going to go up. We don't know when. COVID-19 is going to have a second round of really big problems. We don't know when. And all the problems that we're seeing now are likely going to be enhanced. And if you are traveling, that also will be impacted even more. So there are many reasons to make sure that if you have an application that you're thinking about and you're eligible for it, don't sit around, because the changes that are coming are bigger than we actually thought they would be. And the biggest problem is they're all being compounded by one thing after another. It wasn't just one issue. It's not just the visa, fees going up. It's COVID-19 coming into it. There's a November election coming along, which is also a reason for the administration to make adverse changes. And the biggest change that us lawyers are waiting for right now is something called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival, DACA. It doesn't necessarily impact our British community as much, but there likely are a lot of British folks who are waiting for DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival. This is essentially work permission that President Obama allowed for people who came to the US as children, who are now adults, who can stay here without fear and work without fear. Now, that case had gone to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is now deciding whether this was lawful or not, or whether they will allow this program to continue. And in fact, every Monday and Thursday from here on until the end of June, we're anticipating any day for this decision to come out. And that could be another compounding of potentially protests and who knows what.
Okay. Is there, if someone watching this recording realizes because of this interview, they will be immediately impacted or impacted in the very near future, what do you recommend they do?
Number one, if they already have a lawyer, they should talk to them, because often people on work visas have a company and the company has a lawyer. So speak with them immediately. Don't let the lawyers or the department or HR come to you. Be proactive about it. Look at your visa timeline, look at your own rules, because you likely know about them. So know what your timelines are and take action. If you don't have a lawyer, you're very welcome to contact us. Again, watsonimmigrationlaw.com is our website, and our contact information is from there. And if you are sort of wondering what you need to do, there are lots of websites out there. Look at the official ones. Your local authority likely has information. In Seattle, if you're in Seattle, for example, there's the City of Seattle Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs, and they just today published information about public charge and the various impacts of that. And so there's information out there, but your one-stop shop could be our website, and you can ask us questions from there.
Wonderful. And finally, is there anything else you would like to add or stress to our viewers?
Well, thank you, first of all, Steve, for taking the step to give people this information. One of the things that I have been doing over the last 2 months is doing lots of COVID-19 talks like this. And what is evident is that everything is changing rapidly. People have been stuck outside the US when they traveled while this travel ban was imposed, or people have come into the US and they cannot leave. So it's a very emergent and urgent, change that's going on, where people don't even have enough time to figure out what's affecting them or not. But if you are somebody who's visiting here on an ESTA, for example, beware that, one thing I didn't mention, Steve, is a lot of people can't leave if they're on ESTA because there are no direct flights leaving, and the flights that are going from other countries, they're not necessarily taking Brits or, certain citizens. And so those people can get something called, what was it called? Satisfactory departure. So people have to write to CBP, go to their website, cbp.gov, and write to them saying, I'm here on an ESTA and I need more time because I can't leave. And CBP is directly communicating with clients, although they are also communicating with lawyers too. So whether you need to travel or not travel, depending on which bucket you're in, don't travel if you're in the US and you don't have to, but if you're here and you need to travel outside the country, look at the rules that apply to you. And lastly, keep an eye on the news. It's so, just 10 days ago, the news on television was all about COVID-19 and the numbers that increased. But over the last 10 days, it's all about the protests. And we don't know what the near future is going to hold for us, but these immigration issues are not going anywhere. It's not necessarily going to be, prime time news anymore, because there are other more important issues that are going to be reported. And so you have to do your own digging about what affects you and how it's going to affect you. So definitely sign up to our blog. One of the other things that we're doing is I have a podcast called Tahmina Talks Immigration. You can find that podcast on Apple and Spotify or any other podcast app that you have. Subscribe to them, because we are working on a lot of new episodes that are, essentially about what Steve and I are talking about. So there are multiple ways in which we are trying to make sure our clients get their news.
Okay, well, in winding up the interview, I'd like to thank you, Tahmina, on behalf of Brit Events Northwest and our viewers, for sparing us time to tell us about these important issues. With everything else that is going on in the world at the moment, there was a danger this topic got lost in the frenzy. So thank you, Tahmina, and stay safe. I will take my leave of you two and remind you that we are hoping to have a calendar of safe summer outdoor events from July through to September. Please read our Brit Meetup, Facebook and WhatsApp alerts regarding those events. Visit BritEventsNW.com for more details on how to sign up for Meetup, Facebook and WhatsApp. Thank you, Tahmina, and thank you, viewers, and stay safe all.
Thank you, Steve.